Hey guys, Evan Ork here, back in another video, and today we're going to be doing a review on Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Now I hope you guys don't mind that this review kind of came a week late. I ended up seeing the movie later, which is why this review is coming out later, because I saw it with my good friend GPTV. We had a pretty good time together, except the part where we nearly lost tickets in the beginning, but it was all good at the end. I'll leave a link to his channel down below, make sure to subscribe. I thought going into this movie that it was going to be atrocious and horrible, and if you saw my recent live stream, I still think it was leaning towards bad, but it certainly wasn't this absolute horrible film. So guys, the first pro that came to this movie is that it was admittedly pretty fun. Now, it depends on how you define fun. I'm saying it in the sense of my childhood self that loved kaiju scenes. If you loved kaiju fights and kaiju scenes, they take up like 65 to 70% of the movie. The next pro I'm going to give it was kaiju variety. Now, with the exception of 2014, almost all Godzilla MonsterVerse movies have kind of brought back Toho Godzilla movies into like a modern light. But this is kind of the first movie where we do have the classic kaijus like Godzilla and Kong, but now we have villainous kaijus that we've never seen on the big screen before. In this case, as you probably know, it was Scar King and Shimu. And the fact that we just got to see those kaijus for the first time on the big screen and that they've never been in a movie before was cool. It was creative, but we've never seen it before, and I always welcome new kaiju designs. Personally, I think now that Toho has been working on solo Godzilla movies, it's time they kind of make a -1 style film where Godzilla fights a kaiju we've never seen before. But to get back on track, the third and final pro is that the CGI was a lot better than expected. And don't get me wrong, there was plenty of CGI shots that were absolutely atrocious.
What? It's just an ordinary crabby. Oh my goodness!
But there were far less than I thought there would be. I guess I just got the misconception by seeing certain TV spots. That being said, let's get into the cons of this movie. Now, one of the biggest cons of this movie, and that I completely saw coming, was that the human story absolutely sucked. This is my big problem with MonsterVerse movies. They pay such little attention to human characters. They're really just in there to throw the cheesy, funny one-liners.
Is that a mini Kong?
And the main star of the show is just Godzilla and the kaijus. Now, I know you might think that makes sense. It's a kaiju movie. Why aren't we seeing Godzilla 24/7? But just think for a second. If you went into a kaiju movie, and the entire movie, 2 hours or so, was just Godzilla and the kaijus, wouldn't it get kind of boring after a while? That's why the human story is so important. If the humans have a good story, that only in the end does it connect to the monster story, and then only in the end do you show the monsters, not only have you hyped up the monster scenes throughout the entirety of the movie, but now they're really entertaining because they're now going to be in it for just a decent sized portion, but it's going to be really, really well done. Now, -1 had a great human story, and you can compare their human story to MonsterVerse films and see just how horribly the MonsterVerse does with human stories. For starters, the main character of -1 and his personal problem is that he is fearful. He's not brave in any sense of the word compared to Japanese cultural standards because he kind of chickened out of his kamikaze role. Now, that has absolutely nothing to do with Godzilla. That portion of his character story has nothing to do with the kaijus, and that's the important part. You want to make sure that your human story isn't actually connected in any way to the Godzilla story or to any of the stories with any of the kaijus until you can make a connection at the end. -1 created that connection at the end when he overcame his fear of not being brave enough. He took that insecurity of being a former kamikaze pilot, something that was completely unrelated to Godzilla's half of the story, and then merged it at the end when he decided to dive his plane into Godzilla and ejected out of it. You've taken the human story that was its own thing, and you've taken Godzilla's story that was its own thing as well, completely independent, and then you merged it for something that was cohesive and made sense and really made you feel good for the character. The problem with GXK is that all the humans are following the kaijus 24/7. They have no independency from the monster side of the story. Gia is perhaps the only exception, but you have Gia's mom who works at a monarch center. You have the Australian dude who's the doctor for kaijus. I mean, their whole stories are in the end related to kaijus. And I don't know if you picked up on that, but the fact that I'm not even able to remember their names is a horrible, horrible sign. The next big con I have with this movie is the corniness. So yeah, this movie is pretty corny. One of the prime examples is the Australian doctor. I believe his name was Trapper. Literally every scene that he was in, I just wanted to just walk out of the theater. I was just so done of hearing this annoying, loud, extravagant Steve Irwin kind of guy. So like just going through the whole thing, it's like, why do I care about this character? Why should I care if this character were to, let's say, die right here, right now in the middle of the movie? I would not care. I have no way of connecting to this character, of bonding to this character. Now going back to what was originally a pro, which is now going to diverge into a con, was the balance between the humans and the monster scenes. Absolutely horrible. Literally 70% of this movie is just monster scenes, and only 30% of it is human scenes, I would argue. The problem with that, like I said earlier, is if the kaijus take up most of the story, then they become boring after a while. So now we're gonna get into some nitpicks. Again, another con, which is gonna diverge off a pro that I gave earlier, is that yes, while the CGI was better than expected, I still have to count it as a nitpick that there were certain CGI shots that looked really, really horrible, such as the shot where Godzilla was on top of the mountain. Now this is a final nitpick, which I can 100% see why people might say, well, I actually found this really cool, or I actually agree with you that this was bad. This part is just solely my nitpicky opinion, but I found that the kaiju proportion sizes, thanks to the Hollow Earth, were completely strange. The kaijus looked like they were human sized in the Hollow Earth just because of how ginormous the Hollow Earth was. To the point where we now see them in this human city, it's like, wow, they're so giant here, but they look like they're human sized in the Hollow Earth. I really feel like they should have just looked big regardless of where the location was. So, those are all my pros and cons of this film. Now, in the end, despite going on and on and on in the cons, I'm actually going to give this movie a solid 6.5 out of 10. It is in the end a movie that I didn't think was as horrible as I thought it would, but I still 100% stand by my opinion that it was not necessary for the purpose of the MonsterVerse story to begin in the first place. There was no real need to make this movie other than to make millions of dollars at the box office, which again is of course going to happen because people who haven't studied these kaiju films well are really only going to see it for the kaiju scenes. But once you analyze a lot of these Godzilla movies and see which ones do well and which ones do not do well, these are the movies that do not do well as a movie. As in, cinematically speaking, if you're going to look at it critically, this movie is really horrible, as are unfortunately many of the early Godzilla films, but that's because those films were experimental. Nowadays, because we've seen masterpieces like -1, there's really no excuse to make these critically bad movies anymore. But of course, they're going to keep making them because why not? It means money, and I can't blame the studios for continuing them anyway. So anyways, guys, I still recommend that you watch this movie because it is in the end a Godzilla movie, and if you're a Godzilla fan, of course you should watch it. So thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. See you guys later, and bye-bye.